Arthur's face was a mask of cold fury as he dropped the stack of bank statements onto the break room table. The sound was sharp, like a hammer hitting a nail, cutting through the low hum of the vending machines. Silas, my son-in-law, jumped, nearly knocking over his lukewarm coffee. These papers weren't just numbers on a page. They were a confession of a secret life Silas had fought hard to hide. They were the evidence of a betrayal that went far deeper than a few bad investments. "Where did you get these?" Silas hissed. His voice was thin and shaky, the sound of a man who realized the ground was finally crumbling beneath his feet. I kept my voice low and steady, the tone I'd spent 40 years using on construction sites when a load-bearing wall started to lean the wrong way. "The bank sent a notice to my house by mistake. Silas, a late payment alert from Maya's address. It's hard to ignore a red envelope when it's addressed to the property I'm legally tied to." I tapped the paper, my finger landing on a figure that felt like a weight in the room. $58,000, Silas. All of it in high-interest gambling debt, and every cent of it is secured against my daughter's home, the home I spent my life ensuring she would have. Silas stepped closer, trying to look intimidating in his tailored shirt, but all I could smell was the sharp scent of nervous sweat and stale cologne. The overhead lights flickered, casting harsh shadows across his face. "This is none of your business, Arthur. It's my life, my marriage, and my house." I looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw the hollow arrogance of a man who thought he could outrun his own shadow. "It became my business the moment you gambled away the equity I built with 40 years of sweat. You're using my daughter's future as collateral for your system, and you expect me to look the other way?" Silas swept the papers off the table, sending them fluttering to the floor like autumn leaves. "Stay out of it, old man. I'm handling it. I have a plan." "Your plan is a hole that only gets deeper," I said, bending down to collect the papers. I gathered them with the same methodical care I used when organizing blueprints. Each sheet was a piece of the foundation he was destroying. "These credit lines are tied to Maya's house. Does she even know you've taken out a second mortgage, or that her 401k is being used to pay off bookies?" Silas turned his back on me, staring at the coffee pot as if it held the answers he needed. "She knows enough," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. It was a lie of a cornered animal. "She knows about the equity line?" I asked, standing tall. "She knows you're applying for another $30,000 right now?" He spun around, reaching for my phone as I showed him the screenshot of his latest application. I stepped back, and for a second I saw it. Not the anger, but the sheer, paralyzing fear of a man who knew he was drowning. "You don't understand," he whispered. I was so close. The system was working. The system is a ghost, Silas, and it's about to leave my daughter homeless. Silas let out a hollow, jagged laugh. "My daughter? She's my wife, Arthur. She's lived with me for 4 years. It's time you realize you're just a guest in her life." I tucked the phone into my jacket pocket and looked around the cramped break room. It felt smaller now, the air thick with the smell of burnt coffee and desperation. I spent 30 years working double shifts so Maya would never have to worry about a roof over her head. I said, quietly, I chose mortgage payments over vacations, and I chose her security over my own comfort. I'm not going to watch you throw it all away on a card game. Silas gripped his mug, so hard I thought the ceramic would shatter. "Get out, Arthur. Stay out of my business, or things are going to get very difficult for you." I nodded, my mind already moving to the next phase of the project. I turned toward the door. Silas's voice followed me down the hall, shouting about boundaries and respect. But I wasn't listening. I was calculating. I was looking for the structural flaws in his defense, and I already knew where the primary fracture was. I sat in my truck for a moment after I left his office, the engine ticking as it cooled. I looked at Maya's house across the street. It was a beautiful place, a craftsman-style home in the heart of Raleigh, with a wraparound porch and a garden I'd helped her plant. From the outside, it looked like a dream, but I knew the rot was in the walls now. I waited until I saw Maya's car pull into the driveway. She was home from her shift at the clinic, her shoulders slumped with fatigue. I gave her a few minutes to get inside before I knocked. She opened the door, her phone pressed to her ear, but her smile dimmed when she saw me. "Dad?" "This is a surprise," she said, gesturing for me to come in. The house smelled like expensive lavender candles, but beneath that, there was a tension that felt like static electricity. Maya led me into the kitchen, where a pile of unopened mail sat behind a bread box. I watched her hand tremble as she reached for a coffee mug. "We need to talk about the finances, Maya," I said, skipping the pleasantries. She sighed, a sound of profound exhaustion. "Not today, Dad. I've had a 10-hour shift. Whatever it is, it can wait." "It can't wait," I said, spreading the bank statements across the granite island. She looked at them for a second, her eyes widening as the numbers began to sink in. "What is this? Where did you get Silas's private records?" "These aren't just his records. Maya, these are the liens against your home. $58,000 in debt, all tied to this property. He's been using the house as collateral for gambling." Maya's face went through a dozen emotions in 10 seconds. Denial, shock, and finally, a fierce, protective anger. "This is a mistake. These are fake. You've never liked Silas, and you're just trying to ruin my life. Maya, look at the signatures. Look at the bank logos. I'm trying to save your home. You're trying to control me." She shouted. Her voice was shrill, the sound of someone who was choosing a lie because the truth was too heavy to carry. "Silas told me you'd do this. He said you'd try to sabotage us because you can't stand that I don't need you anymore." I stood there, feeling the weight of 30 years of sacrifice being dismissed in a single sentence. "I don't want to control you, Maya. I want you to have a house that hasn't been gambled away." "Get out," she whispered. Her finger was shaking as she pointed toward the door. "I mean it, Dad. If you don't leave right now, I'm calling the police. I'll tell them you're harassing me and that you broke into our private accounts." Something cold and final settled in my chest. It wasn't the sting of rejection. I'd felt that before. This was the clarity of a structural engineer, realizing a bridge was too far gone to save. I smiled, a small, sad movement of my lips that seemed to confuse her. "You call the police on your father?" I asked quietly. "I'll do whatever I have to do to protect my marriage." She spat. I nodded, slowly collecting papers. I folded them with precision and tucked them into my coat. "I hope Silas is worth the house, Maya, and I hope the house is worth the truth." I walked out the door without looking back. I could feel her watching me from the window, her silhouette framed by the expensive curtains I bought her as a housewarming gift. I got into my truck and drove home, my mind shifting into a different gear. The house felt like a tomb when I entered. I put my keys in the bowl Maya had made for me in middle school and went straight to my office. I pulled out the original mortgage folder. I knew exactly what I was looking for. In 2021, when they bought that house, Silas didn't have the credit or the income to qualify for the loan. Maya was a dental assistant with a steady paycheck, but wasn't enough for the property she wanted. So I stepped in. I didn't just co-sign. I became a co-applicant. I put down $80,000 of my own savings to ensure they got the best rate. I turned the pages until I found the section I needed, joint and several liability. In the eyes of the law, I wasn't just a guarantor. I was a legal co-owner with equal rights to the property's future. Silas and Maya had treated me like a bank, but they'd forgotten that banks have the right to protect their investments. I called Mr. Sterling, a real estate attorney I'd known for years. "Arthur," he said, his voice warm but professional. "I heard about the daughter's new place. Is there a problem?" "There's a rot in the foundation, Mr. Sterling. I need to file for a petition sale. I'm a co-owner, and the property is being misused." There was a pause on the line. "A petition action is a nuclear option, Arthur. It will force a sale of the home, regardless of whether your daughter wants to stay. It'll end the relationship. The relationship ended when she threatened to call the police on me for telling her the truth." I said, "Now, I'm just protecting the equity I worked 40 years to earn." By Monday morning, the paperwork was filed. The legal machinery began to turn, a slow and relentless process that didn't care about family loyalty or marital bliss. A few days later, Silas showed up at my house. He didn't knock. He pounded on the door like he was trying to break it down. When I opened it, he looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. His clothes were wrinkled and his eyes were bloodshot. "What the hell did you do?" He screamed. "I got served at work. A petition suit? You're trying to sell our house out from under us." I leaned against the doorframe, my arms crossed. "It's my house too, Silas. And I'm not going to let you gamble away my half of the equity. The court will order a sale. The debts will be paid from the proceeds, and whatever is left will be split 3 ways. You're a monster." Silas lunged forward, but I didn't move. I'd spent my life around men much tougher than him. "If you touch me, Silas, I'll have you arrested for assault before you can blink. And then I'll tell the court exactly why I'm forcing this sale." Silas backed off, his chest heaving. "Maya is never going to forgive you. You've lost your only daughter over this." "I already lost her," I said. "I lost her when she chose your lies over my 30 years of support. Now, I'm just making sure she has some money in her pocket when you finally finish destroying everything else." He spat on my porch and stormed away. I watched him go. Then I went back inside and called a realtor I trusted. The next few weeks were a blur of legal motions and mounting tension. Maya sent me a dozen texts, each more venomous than the last. She called me every name in the book, accused me of being a bitter old man, and told me she'd never let me see her children if she ever had any. Every message hurt, but I didn't respond. I knew that in her world, Silas was still the hero. But the numbers didn't lie. Mr. Sterling called me into his office mid-March. "The court has approved the petition, Arthur. Since there's clear evidence of financial mismanagement and the co-owners can't agree on a resolution, the judge has ordered a public auction or a private sale within 60 days. How do they take it?" I asked. "They didn't file a response in time," Sterling said. Silas thought he could ignore the summons. "Now, they have 30 days to vacate the property." I felt a pang of sadness, thinking about the garden we'd planted and the porch where I'd hoped to sit with my grandkids. But then I remembered the $58,000 in debt and the threats Silas had made. The foundation was gone. There was no sense in trying to save the roof. I decided it was time to move, not because I was scared, but because I wanted to start my own next chapter. I found a quiet condo near the golf course, a place with good security and a view of the pines. I packed my house, my memories, and my blueprints. On the day Maya and Silas had to move out, I drove by the house one last time. A moving truck was parked in the driveway, and boxes were stacked on the porch. Maya was standing in the yard, looking small and defeated. Silas was arguing with the movers, his face red with frustration. I didn't stop. I just kept driving. The house sold for $450,000. After mortgage was paid and Silas's gambling debts were settled and the legal fees were deducted, there was about $80,000 left. The court divided it according to our ownership stakes. I received $40,000. Maya and Silas received the other $40,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough for Maya to start over if she ever decided to leave him. And for me, it was a clean break. I settled into my new condo, the silence no longer feeling like a burden, but a reward. I spent my mornings on the golf course and my afternoons volunteering at a local vocational school, teaching young kids the basics of structural integrity. A year passed. I didn't hear from Maya. I heard through the grapevine that Silas had lost his job and they'd moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. Part of me wanted to reach out to offer a hand, but I knew the bridge was still out. Then, one rainy Tuesday, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Maya standing there. She looked different. Her hair was shorter, her face was thinner, and the expensive lavender scent was gone. She was holding a small envelope. "Dad," she said. Her voice was quiet, stripped of the anger that had defined our last meeting. "Maya, come in." She sat at my kitchen table, the same table where she used to do her homework. I made her a cup of tea, and for a long time we just sat in silence. "I left him," she said finally. The envelope was a check for $20,000. I used the money from the house sale to pay off his new debts. But then he just started again. "I realized you were right. I realized the foundation was rotten." I reached across the table and took her hand. It was cold and trembling. "I don't want the money back. Maya, I want you to be safe." "I'm sorry," she whispered, the tears finally starting to fall. "I'm so sorry for everything I said. I thought I was protecting my life, but I was just protecting a lie. It's okay, sweetheart. Foundations can be rebuilt. It just takes time and the right materials. We talked for hours that night, not about the house or the money, but about the future. I helped her find a small place near my condo, and I helped her get a job at a larger clinic. We started small, rebuilding the bridge one brick at a time. Silas eventually moved away, chasing another system in another city. But Maya stayed. She learned to balance her own checkbook, and she learned the value of a steady, reliable foundation. Sometimes, when the sun is setting over the pines, we sit on my balcony and talk about the buildings I used to design. I tell her that the most important part of any structure isn't the glass or the steel or the fancy curtains. It's the part you can't see. It's the part that goes deep into the earth and holds everything else up when the storm hits. And now, for the first time in years, our foundation is solid. It's built on the truth, and it's built to last. I looked at her, my daughter, and I realized that losing the house was the best thing that ever happened to us. Because a house is just wood and stone. But a family is something you build with your bare hands every single day. And this time, we were doing it right. Arthur leaned back in his chair, the sound of the rain against the window, a soothing rhythm. The past few years have been a gauntlet of emotional and financial trials, but as he watched Maya navigate her new life, he felt a profound sense of accomplishment. It wasn't the kind of victory he'd ever imagined, forcing his own child out of her home, but it was a kind of hard-won peace that only comes from making the impossible choice. Raleigh was growing, the skyline he'd helped shape continuing to reach higher. But for Arthur, the most beautiful thing he saw every day was a steady, quiet growth of his daughter's independence. She was no longer the girl who covered her ears to the truth. She was a woman who looked life in the eye, understood the costs, and paid them without complaint. Silas became a distant memory, a cautionary tale of what happens when you try to build a life on air and promises. But Maya and Arthur remained. They were the survivors of the wreckage, the ones who had picked through the debris and found the things worth saving. One evening, as they were finishing a quiet dinner at Arthur's condo, Maya looked at him with a thoughtful expression. "Dad, do you ever regret it? Filing the suit?" Arthur took a sip of his coffee, the warmth grounding him. "I regret that it was necessary, Maya. I regret that I couldn't find a way to make you see the truth without destroying the dream you'd built. But I don't regret the result. You're here. You're whole. And you're not owned by anyone's debt, but your own." Maya nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "I used to think you were trying to break me, but now I see you were just making sure I didn't shatter when the walls finally fell. That's what a foundation does, sweetheart," Arthur said. "It doesn't stop the storm. It just makes sure you're still standing when the sun comes up." And as the clouds cleared and the moon rose over the pines, Arthur knew his work was finally done. He had built many things in his life, skyscrapers, bridges, highways. But this, rebuilding the trust with his daughter, was the most important project of his life. And it was by far his masterpiece. The legal papers were long gone, filed away in a drawer he never opened. The anger had evaporated, replaced by a deep, resonant gratitude. They had lost a house, but they had found a home in each other. And in the grand engineering of life, that was the only thing that really mattered. Arthur stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city he loved. The lights were twinkling, thousands of homes filled with thousands of stories. He hoped that some of them were as lucky as he was. He hoped they had someone willing to tell them the truth, even when it hurt. Because without the truth, you're just living in a house of cards, waiting for the wind to blow. But Arthur and Maya, they were built on stone, and they weren't going anywhere. The days turned into months, and the months into years. Arthur eventually retired fully, but he never truly stopped building. He spent his time helping Maya renovate her small townhouse, teaching her how to check for level and how to ensure the joints were tight. They laughed more now, the tension of the past a distant echo. Maya eventually met someone else, a quiet, steady man who worked as a librarian. He didn't have a system, and he didn't care about investments. He just cared about her. And when Arthur met him, he didn't check his credit score. He just looked at the way he treated his daughter. "He's a good man, Dad," Maya said one evening as they watched her new husband garden in the small backyard. Arthur nodded, a sense of peace settling over him. He's got a good foundation, Maya. That's all that matters. And as the years rolled on, the story of the monster father who sued his own daughter became a family legend. A story not of cruelty, but the kind of love that is willing to be hated in order to save. It was a story of the nuclear option and the beautiful, quiet life that grew in the aftermath. Arthur Thorne died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 82. At his funeral, the room was filled with the people he'd helped, engineers he'd mentored, contractors he'd kept honest, and most importantly, his daughter. Maya stood at the podium, her voice steady and clear. "My father was an engineer," she told the crowd. "He spent his life making sure things were solid. And when my own life was built on a lie, he had the courage to tear it down so I could build something real. He taught me that the truth is the only foundation worth having." She looked down at the front row, where her husband and her 2 children sat. They were safe, they were secure, and they were whole. "I'm standing here today because my father wasn't afraid to be the bad guy in my story, so I could be the hero in mine," she said. And as the sun set over the North Carolina hills, Maya knew that her father's legacy wasn't in the buildings he designed or the bridges he built. It was in the steady, unbreakable strength of the family he had saved. It was in the truth, and it was built to last forever. Arthur's condo was eventually sold, and the proceeds went to a scholarship fund for young structural engineers. But the lessons he taught lived on. Every time Maya looked at her home, she didn't just see walls and a roof. She saw the integrity of a man who loved her enough to let her go so she could find her way back. She saw the foundation, and it was perfect